Picture this. It is December 21st, 2025. You are standing on the heat-shimmering tarmac of Sanya Phoenix International Airport.
Okay, center the scene.
Yeah, the humidity is just rising, jet engines are whining all around you, and you are watching a Boeing 737 AGX-9 taxi toward the runway. It is flight DV481.
Right.
Now, if you look closely at the tail fin, you'll see it belongs to SCAT Airlines.
Which is a carrier from Kazakhstan.
Exactly. But here's the catch. This plane is not flying to Kazakhstan. It is fully loaded, passengers, cargo, and it is heading straight for Prague in the Czech Republic.
So Kazakh airline is flying from a Chinese island to Central Europe.
Without ever touching its home country.
Which, under the old rules of global aviation gravity, that is impossible. It shouldn't exist.
Right. It is a ghost flight, but it is very real. And it's actually the first signal that the rules of gravity and global trade have just been entirely rewritten.
Okay, I love the drama of ghost flight, but let's pin down exactly why this matters for the people listening. Because planes fly weird routes sometimes. Why is this specific flight such a massive red flag for the old system?
Well, it comes down to what the industry calls the freedoms of the air. Traditionally, you have the third and fourth freedoms. Basically, you can fly from your home country or you can fly back to it.
Yeah, the classic hub and spoke. A British Airways plane flies from London to New York. It doesn't just randomly fly New York to Tokyo without touching London first.
Precisely. That model has defined global aviation for 70 years, but Flight DV481, it's using what's called the seventh freedom of the air.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it completely ignores the home country. It turns Sanya, a city on an island in southern China, into a totally independent international launch pad.
So SCAT Airlines is essentially treating Hainan like it is international waters.
Legally speaking, yes. And that is the very first signal that the Hainan customs closure, which officially launched just days before on December 18, 2025, is fully active.
So today, on the deep dive, we are unpacking what we're calling the Hainan paradox.
The mission today is to decode why China has taken an island roughly the size of Belgium and turned it into a territory that is, quote, within the border, but outside the customs.
And if you're listening and thinking this is just about duty-free cosmetics or cheaper resort hotels, you are missing the forest for the palm trees here.
Totally.
This is a highly strategic move to rewire the global supply chain. And frankly, it is a direct challenge to the dominance of places like Singapore.
But I think we need to start with the mechanics, because customs closure sounds like, well, it sounds like they are shutting the doors, locking the island down.
Right, but it's actually the exact opposite. The official policy is opening up at the first line, strict regulation at the second line.
Let's give everyone the visual for that, first line, second line.
Okay, imagine Hainan is surrounded by two invisible fences. The first line is the border between Hainan and the rest of the world. They have basically torn that fence down. Most goods coming from overseas can enter Hainan tariff-free. Zero taxes.
So it's an economic free-for-all on the island itself?
Essentially, yeah. But then you have the second line. That is the border between Hainan and mainland China. And that fence is electrified.
Highly regulated.
Exactly. If you try to move those tariff-free foreign goods from Hainan into the mainland, boom, you get hit with the standard tariffs.
Which, I have to say, caused a lot of confusion on the ground. Like, if I'm a local resident in Haikou and I've been hearing about this massive customs closure for years, I am expecting a windfall.
Oh, for sure.
I am expecting to buy a luxury watch tax-free and wear it on a trip to Shanghai. Or, bring a crate of French wine to my family in Beijing.
Well, that didn't happen.
It absolutely didn't happen. The mood leading up to the closure was actually pretty sour locally. Residents were like, wait, where is my dividend? They realized if they buy goods to take to the mainland, they still pay the tax retroactively.
Right. Feel like nothing changed for them.
Exactly. It's no different than clearing customs in Shanghai. So who is this for? If the locals aren't getting the perks, what is the point of this multi-billion-dollar project?
Well, that's the aha moment here. The dividends are not for the tourists. The target audience is foreign capital. It's the global supply chain.
But wait, if the second line is strict and you still have to pay tariffs to get into the massive mainland market, how does that actually help a global manufacturer?
Because of the killer app of this whole policy, it is called the 30% value add rule.
Okay, that sounds like pure bureaucratic jargon.
It does, but it's honestly an alchemy spell. Let me give you a concrete example. Say you are a German medical device company. You import high-tech lenses, sensors, raw materials into Hainan.
Zero tariffs because of the open first line.
Right, so those parts are sitting in a warehouse in Hainan. cheap to bring in. Now, you hire local technicians on the island to assemble those parts into an MRI machine. You write the software locally, you calibrate it, maybe you fabricate the outer casing there. If that local work accounts for more than 30% of the value of the final machine,
The machine's identity transforms.
yes. Legally, it loses its German identity. It becomes made in China. And because it has that label, it can cross that strict second line into the mainland with zero tariffs.
Wow. So you just accessed the world's largest consumer market tax-free using foreign parts?
You see why it's a killer app now. It's basically an identity laundering machine for goods.
Identity laundering. I love that phrasing. You take a foreign product, you give it a 30% makeover on a tropical island, and suddenly it's got a Chinese passport.
And for massive companies, you know, a TSMC or a Volkswagen, this is irresistible. You get the low cost of global sourcing, but the market access of a domestic player.
Plus, they are sweetening the pot with taxes.
Oh, aggressively.
Yeah.
If you're an enterprise in Hainan and you have substantive business, meaning you actually have desks and employees there, you're not just a mailbox. You pay a 15% income tax.
Same for high-end talent, too, I think.
Yep. As long as you live there 90 days a year. And they've slashed red tape on machinery. There's this thing called the Catalog of Prohibited and Restricted Goods.
Right.
They actually removed import license requirements for 60 types of used mechanical and electrical equipment. We're talking printing presses, agricultural tech, medical devices.
So they are practically begging companies to physically move their production lines there. They don't want a shell company economy.
No, they want smokestacks, they want server farms, they want the real deal.
Which brings us to a huge strategic puzzle. And I'd say this is really the second major theme of our deep dive. Why Hainan?
Right, why build a brand new free port when China already has Hong Kong, which is a legendary global financial hub, and Shanghai, which is an absolute economic engine?
It's a massive undertaking. Why reinvent the wheel on a tropical island?
So think about it like an operating system. Hong Kong is like an iPhone running iOS. It is a finished product. It runs on British common law. It's highly financialized, and it is hardwired into the Western regulatory network.
You can't just install experimental Android apps on an iPhone.
Exactly. And you definitely can't jailbreak the iPhone without voiding the warranty. It's politically sensitive. If you try to rewrite the underlying code of Hong Kong's trade rules for a radical experiment, the political risk is just too high.
Okay, so Hong Kong is too rigid. What about Shanghai?
Shanghai is simply too big to fail. It's the heart of the Yangtze River Delta economy. If you run a radical tax and customs experiment there and the system crashes,
You've crashed the whole Chinese economy.
right, the blast radius is unmanageable.
So Hainan is the sandbox.
It's the perfect sandbox. It is a geographically independent unit. It has weak international political symbolism compared to Hong Kong, and a much simpler social structure than a megacity like Shanghai.
Meaning it's rollbackable.
Yes. If the Hainan experiment completely fails, you just contain the blast to the island. But if it works,
It becomes a hybrid model.
it becomes what we call a sample of China. It combines free port privileges with China's two real superpowers,
Yeah.
a massive unified market and a complete end-to-end supply chain.
And we really have to view this through the lens of what the world looks like now. You call it fragmented globalization.
Yeah, because since about 2018, with the U.S.-China trade friction, we moved away from that standardized WTO globalization. The world is breaking into regional protectionist blocks.
So Hainan is China proactively building a unit designed to survive in a fragmented world.
Exactly. It's an adaptation.
But adaptation means competing with the species that are already out there. Which brings us to Singapore. If I am sitting in Singapore right now looking at this map, I am sweating.
You should be. And this loops us right back to that impossible flight we started with, the seventh freedom of the air.
The ghost flight to Prague. How does that translate to a threat to Singapore?
Speed.
Yeah.
In logistics, speed is everything. Usually only massive established hubs like Singapore or Dubai have the leverage to allow foreign airlines to run independent routes like that.
Right.
But by Hainan unlocking this, it creates what we call the DHL scenario.
Walk us through the DHL scenario.
Okay, say a chip company sets up processing in Hainan. Because of that seventh freedom, they can charter U.S. cargo planes to fly directly from Hainan to Silicon Valley or London.
No stopping at a hub.
No stopping. Logistics efficiency could be 30% higher than competitors stuck using traditional transit routes.
That is massive for high-value goods like microchips, but Singapore's real crown jewel is the ocean, right? It's maritime shipping.
It is. But remember what the Port of Singapore actually does. It is a transshipment hub. Almost 90% of the containers that dock there are just passing through. They get moved from a giant ship to a smaller ship.
And Hainan is cutting into that exact business model.
Aggressively. Look at Yangpu Port in Hainan. Just in the first 3 quarters of 2025, their bonded fuel bunkering, which is just refueling ships, soared by 210%.
210%. That is wild.
Because the fuel there is 8% cheaper than in Singapore.
Ah, follow the money.
Always. Ships from Maersk and CMA CGM, the biggest players in the world, they are diverting to Hainan to refuel. They're saving around $35,000. That's about 240,000 RMB per fill-up.
That adds up so fast for a massive fleet.
But there is another layer to the manufacturing side that is even more of a threat to traditional hubs. We call it the manufacturing shield.
Okay, the shield. This is where it gets highly geopolitical, right?
Take Indonesia, for example. The EU has put out strict environmental restrictions that effectively block a lot of Indonesian palm oil exports.
So Indonesia has this massive commodity, and they are suddenly locked out of a huge market.
Right, so what do? They ship the raw palm oil to Hainan.
Tariff-free.
Tariff-free. In Hainan, it gets refined, the formula is adjusted, it gets packaged, they hit that 30% value add threshold.
And the identity flips.
Suddenly, it is not restricted Indonesian palm oil. It is a legally processed good from Hainan, China.
And then it just flows freely into Europe.
Or into China, or anywhere else. Hainan becomes this shared industrial park for Asia. It allows neighboring countries to utilize the Made in China label legally as a shield against trade sanctions.
That is just brilliant maneuvering. They are making themselves indispensable to their neighbors' economies.
Exactly.
But if we zoom out even further, I mean, we've talked about the air routes, we've talked about the sea routes. There is a land component to this strategy that sounds like a 300-year-old myth coming to life. The Thai connection.
The long game. This is my favorite part of the whole puzzle.
So Thailand has had this dream for centuries regarding the Krat Isthmus.
Yeah, if you look at a map, there's this very narrow stretch of land in southern Thailand connecting it to Malaysia. For 300 years, people have proposed digging a canal right through it.
To bypass the Malacca Strait.
Because Malacca is the ultimate choke point. Almost everything flows through it, and it's heavily influenced by Singapore and the U.S.
Yeah.
For China, that is the Malacca dilemma.
If things go south geopolitically, that strait gets closed, and China's energy supply is totally cut off.
Exactly. Now, the canal idea was always too expensive, too messy. But the modern reality is the Thailand Bridge project.
Scheduled for around 2030, right?
Yep. It is a high-speed rail and road corridor, deep-sea ports on both sides of that narrow strip of land, connected by rail.
And how does that tie into Hainan?
Well, if you draw a straight line from the Pacific exit of that proposed land bridge, it points directly at Hainan.
Oh, wow. It's a direct shot.
It creates a geopolitical closed loop. Imagine a shipping container coming from the Middle East. Instead of sailing all the way down and around Singapore, it hits the west coast of Thailand.
Zips across the land bridge on a train.
Loads onto a ship on the east side and sails straight into Hainan for processing or direct entry into the Chinese market.
Completely bypassing Singapore.
Bypassing Malacca entirely. It saves 1,200 kilometers of travel. It saves a fortune in fuel. But strategically, it rewires the trade routes of the entire Indo-Pacific.
They're basically building a new circulatory system for global trade.
And Hainan is the heart pumping that system.
It's fascinating, but let's bring it back to reality for a second. We have this incredible vision, the customs closure, the 30% rule, the Thailand Bridge. Is this actually going to work?
That is the trillion-dollar question. And there are huge risks. The most obvious one is the shell company problem.
Because everyone loves a tax loophole.
Exactly. They want real manufacturing.
Right.
But with a 15% income tax rate, the temptation for companies to just set up a fake office with one desk and a phone just to dodge taxes.
Like our tigers.
Yeah, it's a massive regulatory headache to police that.
And then there is the geopolitical risk, which we cannot ignore. The 2025 U.S. national security strategy was incredibly blunt about this.
Very blunt. The U.S. has an explicit fear of competitors dominating the South China Sea. And Hainan is not just a free trade port.
No, it's home to major naval bases.
It is an unsinkable aircraft carrier sitting right in the middle of one of the most contested waterways on Earth. You cannot separate the economic experiment from the military reality.
So it's a target as much as it is a shield.
Exactly. If Hainan succeeds, It shifts the global center of gravity.
It completely changes how you look at a map. We grow up looking at maps as these static drawings. The borders are just lines on paper, the oceans are blue, the land is green.
But what Hainan proves is that geography isn't destiny.
No.
Maps are fluid, and they are defined just as much by tax codes and customs laws as they are by mountains and rivers.
So what is the final verdict here? Is this the future of globalization, or is it just a massive gamble?
It's both. But I want to leave you with this thought. We usually assume that to move the center of the world, to dictate who runs the global economy, you need a war. You need conquest.
Right. Historically, that's how it worked.
But the Hainan paradox suggests something completely different. It suggests that with the exact right mix of institutional innovation, concrete, and tax rates,
You don't need to fire a single shot.
no, you can just rezone the world.
Rezoning the world. That is such a powerful idea, that bureaucracy and policy can physically move the center of global trade.
It's the ultimate soft power weapon.
Absolutely. Well, for everyone listening, keep a very close eye on Flight DV481 and watch those ships docking in Yangpu Port, because the map is changing a lot faster than you think. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.